Carmilla. Chapter 16. Conclusion. I write all this, you suppose, with composure, but far from it. I cannot think of it without some sort of agitation. Nothing but your earnest desire, so repeatedly expressed, could have induced me to sit down to a task that has unstrung my nerves for months to come, and reinduce the shadow of the unspeakable horror which years after my deliverance continue to make my days and nights dreadful, and solitude insupportably terrific. Let me add a word or two about that quaint Baron Woldenberg, to whose curious lore we were indebted for the discovery of that Countess Marsilla's grave. He had taken up his abode in Gratz, where, living upon a mere pittance, which was all that retained to him of the once princely estates of his massed family, in Upper Styria he devoted himself to the minute and laborious investigations of the marvelous and authenticated tradition of vampirism. He had at his finger ends all the great and little works upon the subject: Magia Postuma, Philogenion de Mirabilis, Augustus Doctora per Mortis, Philosophica et Christiania Cogitatius Dio Vampira, by John Christopher Henberg, and 1,000 others, among which I remember only a few of these, which he lent to my father upon request. He had a voluminous digest of all judicial cases, from which he had extracted a system of principles that appeared to govern some ways, and others occasionally only, the condition of the vampire. I may mention in passing that the deadly parlor attributed to that sort of revenant is a mere melodramatic fiction. They present, in the grave, and when they show themselves in human society, the appearance of quite healthy life. When disclosed to light in their coffins, they exhibit all the symptoms that are enumerated as those which prove the vampire life of the long-dead Countess Karnstein. How they escape from their graves and return to them for certain hours every day, without displacing the clay, or leaving any trace of disturbance in the state of the coffin or the cerements, has always been admitted to be utterly inexplicable. The amphibious existence of the vampire is sustained by daily renewed slumber in their grave. Its horrible lust for living blood supplies the vigor of its waking existence, and the vampire is prone to be fascinated with an engrossing vehemence, resembling the passion of love, by particular persons. In pursuit of these, it will exercise inexhaustible patience and stratagem for access to a particular object, which may be obstructed in 100 ways. It will never desist until it has satisfied its passion and drained the very life of its coveted victim. But it will, in these cases, husband and protract its murderous enjoyment with the refinement of an epicure, and heighten it by the gradual approaches of an artful courtship. In these cases it seems to years from something like sympathy and consent. In ordinary ones it goes direct to its object, overpowers them with violence, strangles and exhausts often at a single feast. The vampire is apparently subject in certain situations to special conditions. In the particular instance in which I have given you a relation, Mircalla seemed to be limited to a name which, if not a real one, should at least reproduce, without the omission or addition of a single letter, those, as we say, ungrammatically which compose it. Carmilla did this. So did Millarca. My father related to the Baron Vondenberg, whom remained with us for 2 or 3 weeks after the expulsion of Carmilla, the story about the Moravian nobleman and the vampire at Karnstein churchyard, and then he asked the Baron how he had discovered the exact position of the long-concealed tomb of the Countess Milcarla. The Baron's grotesque features puckered up into a mysterious smile. He looked down, still smiling on his worn spectacle case, and fumbling with it. Then, looking up, he said, "I have many journals and other papers written by that remarkable man. The most curious among them is one treating of the visit of which you speak to Karnstein. The tradition, of course, discolors and distorts a little. He might have been termed a Morvian nobleman, for he had changed his abode to that territory, and was, besides, a noble. But he was, in truth, a native of Upper Styria. It is often to say that in very early youth he had been a passionate and favoured lover of the beautiful Makarla, Countess Karnstein. Her early death plunged him into inconsolable grief. It is the nature of vampires to increase and to multiply, but according to an ascertained and a ghastly law. Assume, at starting, a territory perfectly free from this pest. How does it begin? How does it multiply? I will tell you. A person, more or less wicked, puts an end to themselves. Suicide, under certain circumstances, become vampiric. That spectre visits living people in their slumbers. They die, and almost invariably, in the grave, develop into vampirics. This happened in the case of the beautiful Makarla, who was haunted by one of these demons. My ancestor, Vordenburg, whose title I still bear, soon discovered this, and in the course of the studies to which he devoted, he learned a great deal more. Among other things, he concluded that suspicion of vampirism would probably fall, sooner or later, upon the dead countess, who in life had been his one true idol. He conceived a horror, be she what she might, of her remains being profaned by the outrage of her posthumous execution. He has left a curious paper to prove that the vampire, on its expulsion from its amphibious existence, is projected into a far more horrible life, and he resolved to save his once beloved Makarla from this. He adopted the stratagem of a journey here, pretended to remove her remains, and a real obliteration of her monument, when age had stolen upon him, and from the veil of years he looked back on the scene he was leaving. He considered, in a different spirit, what he had done to the world, and a horror took possession of him. He made the tracings and notes which have guided me to this very spot, and drew up a confession of the deception that he had practiced. If he had intended any further action in this matter, death prevented him, and the hand of a remote descendant has, too late for many, directed the pursuit to the lair of this beast. We talked a little more, and among other things he said was this: one sign of the vampire is the power of the hand. The slender hand of Milcarla closed like a vice of steel on the general's wrist when he raised the hatchet, but its power was not confined to its grasp. It leaves a numbness in the limb it seizes, which is slowly, if ever, truly recovered from. The following spring, my father took me a tour through Italy. We remained away for more than a year, and it was long before the terror of recent events slowly subsided, and to this hour the image of Carmilla returns to memory with ambiguous alternations. Sometimes I see the playful, languid, beautiful girl, sometimes the withering fiend I saw in the ruined church, and often from a reverie that I have started, fancying I heard the light step of Carmilla at the drawing-room door.